Okay, so service quality and total quality management. If you remember from the lectures, we had we started off with service quality, and then I did an additional session on TQM. So I've sort of added that in to the original model answer roadmap that we did in class. So just talk through this quickly and then we'll go section by section. Start off with your intro, then define the hospitality industry, then define service quality, and then you've got all those bits around it, and then give that some context with some examples, then lead that through to TQM, which we did in the second section, and then have a look at your relationship with competitive business, and then you've got your summary, which, like the other one, will relate to your intro. So let's start off with defining hospitality industry. Now, I'm not going to define it for you now, because I know for a fact that when I taught you in level 4, I gave you an academic definition of hospitality, and you should have seen one before, but here's some links where you can find it. And again, you'll get this in your slide deck. I've got everybody's name written down, so I'll send you all an email with both the slide decks and the links to the recording of the session, so that you can go back and review it if you need to. So then we're looking at definition of service quality, and this is a little bit more detailed than just providing a definition of hospitality, one straight definition. I want you to talk about, and these are the things that we went through in class, but all these different areas of service quality, so what they need. And just like the last session, I'm not going to go through the theory again, but I'm going to point you to the resources. Most of them, certainly for this question, you've had in the lecture notes, so I'm going to refer you back to the lecture notes and then just give you a little inkling of what you might want to talk about and where you would get that from. So first things first, let's talk about customer expectations. So again, you've got that in your lecture notes from the service quality lecture, and we're looking at how customer expectations is a very individual thing. Different people will have different expectations, and those expectations will change given different circumstances. So even if the service conditions are exactly the same, they could have a completely different service experience from you based on different things like their mood, the weather, whether they've just been paid or they're waiting to get, all sorts of different things can affect how that service encounter can change. Then we've got internal and external customers, and we talked about how just because it's it's not just external customers that our actions as service providers affects, because we've also got internal customers. So if you're looking at a restaurant setting, the chef's got an internal customer in the service staff, because they're dependent on the chef to do what they do properly, for them to be able to do what they do properly, which then affects the consumer and the consumer experience, given that individual service moment. Next, tangible and intangible aspects of service. So we looked at tangible things, that's things you can see, you can touch, you can smell, etc., etc. and then we looked at intangibles. So we talked about the moment of truth and relying on people skills, all those sorts of things. And these are the things that are harder to control. Tangible aspects we can control fairly easily with a set of rigorous control measures or standard operating procedures. But the intangible stuff, that's the stuff that's harder, and that's where you get the most benefit of a robust recruitment and selection process, because you're relying on personalities to do what you need to do. So you talk about customer expectations, you talk about your different types of customers, you talk about tangible and intangible, and this is all about defining service quality. It's all these things that surround service quality that actually define what it is. So that's why I'm making mention of them. Next one, we've got service recovery. So we did discuss how service recovery was important, because it's not possible to be 100% right on top of your game, be it intangible or tangible stuff. Being 100% on top of your game means you get everything right absolutely fantastic the first time, because it all depends on everything falling into place logistically, people in the right frame of mind to receive the right kind of service, people being in the right frame of mind to give the right kind of service, all those sorts of different things. So there are going to be times when levels of service either fall down or they're perceived to fall down, and it's how you deal with that. That's the service recovery bit, because the service recovery, if that's successful, that's what gives you a shot at getting people to come back even if they've had a poor experience. So first bit of that service recovery, we're talking about empowerment. So unless you empower staff to be able to negotiate that service recovery, if they don't feel empowered to do that, and it keeps getting passed up the chain, the chances are you've got an ever increasing set of disenfranchised consumers. So leading on from empowerment to the actual service recovery section, you can look at ways to approach service recovery. So again, these are in the lecture notes. These are just printouts from the slides of your lecture notes, which you should already have, and if not, they're on Moodle, on different approaches to service recovery, and these are some things that you talk about when you're going through that section. Now, if you see in this definition of service quality, it's quite important. You've got 2, 4, 6. You've got 7 areas there, so you need to be as succinct as you can be. But the chances are that this definition section is one of the major areas of your answer. So plan that accordingly. Just because the model answer roadmap's got, I don't know, is it 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, doesn't mean each one's got a quarter. This has probably got a lot more than a quarter, possibly up to half. But I'll leave that for you to decide. So next one, we'll look at a specific definition of quality service. So this is what we would use for as central to all these other things, the 4 arenas, the customer expectation, tangible, intangible, etc., etc. So it's meeting customer expectations, but not only meeting them, before we do that, we've got to gauge and manage and react to their expectations. So, and then we talk further about that under serve qual, which I've got a little bit of right at the end of this slide deck. Then moving on from that, we look at the 4 arenas of service. No, we don't. We go to apologies, procedural and personal first, which is also part of your holistic definition of service quality. So procedural systems and processes, personal, that's what we've already talked about with the empowerment stuff as well, is much more difficult to control because it's about how different personalities in the service encounter, both from our side and the customer side, how they react to different scenarios. So it's important that you have the right personnel to deal with different aspects of customers, different types of customers, and different ways of service encounters going. Then we looked at the 4 arenas. So remember we looked at we got the oh, I've put the wrong slide in there, apologies. I'll change that before I give it to you. But you've got the all the different service characteristics and hang on, let me change that now. Okay. Just bear with me. No, maybe not so much. Okay, I'll change that when I finish the section. Of service. Okay, so alright, just answer Luke's question first. Luke's saying, so I'm saying defining service quality is the most important section. Yes, I am. And you briefly touch on all 7 areas, or explain less but in more detail. So no, talk about all those 7 areas. So that's where I was saying that just because it's one of 4 sections within your answer doesn't mean that each section has equal footing. So this section, in terms of defining service quality, would have more importance and therefore more length and size than your other sections. If it was me, I'm guessing probably this would be about 50% of my answer. So then you can gauge your word counts from your 7 sections from all of that. Okay, so just want you to bear with me 1 second, guys. I'm going to try and find that for you now. And just bear with me a sec. Okay, I'm just loading that 4 arenas, 4 customer service arenas, the 4 slides. I'll just show you those quickly, and then I'll change the slide deck that I sent to you. And yeah, you can just talk in generically about the 4 arenas. Emily's just asked, with the 4 arenas, do we describe all 4 diagrams or just describe the model? You're just describing the model, and no, you don't need to draw them as well. So you've got the freezer, which is low in procedural control and low poor in personal control. Then you've got the factory, high procedures, so you've got lots of controls in there, but not so much on your personal. Friendly zoo, low in procedure, so you've not got a lot of controls in place, but you have got high levels of personal service. And then this is the optimal, which is the quality customer service. It's high in procedure, so you've got lots there that you can use to control, and you've also got high levels of personal characteristics too. Okay. So just before I go on to the next slide, we seem to be rattling through this slide deck quite quickly. Any questions? No, you don't need to draw them, Sarah. Sarah's just asking the same as Emily. She would not have to draw them. No, I'm not expecting any diagrams. If you want to draw them, that's fine, but it's a bit too much to expect from an exam, unless it was quite a quite simple thing. So, application to hospitality industry. What I'm looking for you to do there, and I'm not going to give you examples, try and draw examples from places you've worked, from case studies you've looked at or case studies you've found. If you're still struggling this time next week with trying to find industry examples of managing service quality, then come back to me and I'll throw you a bonus of cases. But there's loads out there. But it's much better. I'd much rather, and it's much better if you draw on your own examples. Virtually all of you have worked in a hospitality setting, so look at some of the things that you did. Apply those to the theories that we've just talked about. How do they fit? Do they fit? Don't they fit? Especially that 4 arenas of service, you could easily describe some of the places, whether it's a friendly zoo or a freezer or a factory or whatever, or even if it's the optimal quality service model. You can apply your experiences to that. Tiffany's just asking, if you'd write an example in the first person, third person, doesn't really matter. That's not the sort of thing we look at in an exam situation, so that's entirely up to you. I'm also quite happy if this application to hospitality industry, if you contextualise your examples all throughout the rest rather than having it as a distinct section. So if you look at the green bit, the defining service quality and all those little subheadings, you could quite easily do your application and your context there rather than its own discrete section. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so we'll move on to total quality management. So we'll start off definition of quality. So we've already looked at these, but you can draw back to them because TQM has a much more academic feel to it. So there's a little bit more robustness in breaking these things down. So you've got consumer perception, all those things there, fitness for use, support services, etc., etc. And then talking about what TQM is, it's a comprehensive organisation-wide effort to improve the quality of products or services. Now, this can work for all organisations, be it service, manufacturing, whatever the restraints are, but there are differences between manufacturing quality and service quality. So your manufacturing quality focuses on a tangible product, so much easier to control because you'll have a set of systems and you'll have tolerances for you know, it might well be let's say you're manufacturing a screw. It'll have a certain tolerance in terms of its length and the depth of the ridges on the screw head itself, etc., etc. So all those things you can document, you can focus on, and you can control, and you can inspect, etc. But if you look at a servicing counter or service organisations, which, you know, that's the main thrust of what the hospitality industry is. We're a service industry. That's more about perceptual stuff. So how we respond, how we interact with the consumer, but also how they interact with us. Things like waiting times and consistency. You know, if you go to a place, have a really fantastic meal, your expectations are raised for the next time you go, and if those expectations aren't met, then you're walking away disappointed. Whereas if you're buying a screw, if it holds the two bits of wood together, just like it did last time, then everyone's a winner. We're all happy. So then, this is optional, but if you've got the room and you feel driven to do some additional research on total quality management, you can talk about how it's evolved over time, and this is just a little idea of what happened during the evolution of TQM. This is what's different about TQM, so you're focusing on the customer, continuous improvement. So where we're talking about the consumer coming and having a fantastic meal, how do you top that? You know, that's quite a tricky thing to look at. But you can do some of your own research on some of these other models. So the Kaizen and the Six Sigma ones, they're quite heavy, but you know, it might be worth scanning some of that literature. Quality at source, so prevention and problem solving versus inspection. So that's pretty apt in a servicing counter, because what you're doing is you're stopping problems before they happen, and if you're not stopping them, at least you're solving them straight away, rather than after the encounter you're saying, well, what went wrong there, how can we make it not happen again? Because by doing that you've already got a disappointed customer. So if you can solve the problem at the point of service recovery, then you're not necessarily losing a customer. And again, that brings into the final point about employee empowerment, which in our industry is second to nothing else in terms of importance. Then we're just continuing on from that. We're looking at understanding quality tools. We'll have a look at that. Team approach, benchmarking. That's most important for us, is benchmarking, because what we need to do is make sure that we're as good as or better than the competition, because that's how our consumers will view us. They're not going to say, I'll keep going to that place because that's where I go and I like it. They'll look at other options and they'll say, well, what happens if I go to this place instead? Is the food better? Is it cheaper? Is the service better? Etc. etc. So benchmarking for us is really important. Managing supplier quality, you know, just as important in terms of the tangible product that we're serving to customers if we're looking at a restaurant approach. But not only that, you'll find that in contemporary society that sort of thing is a given now, that we need to make sure that we're on top of what our suppliers are giving to us. So we've got some ways of improving quality. We've got the plan, do, study, act cycle, originally called the Deming wheel, but it's an ever evolving process. I've got a little diagram just after this slide which shows you what happens, and then we've got 7 tools of quality control, which I'll go through. Actually, I'm not sure I'm going through those. Let me have a look on Yes, I am, just briefly. But you've got your lecture notes for these 7 tools as well, which you can go through and get some more detail of them. So there we go. So the Deming wheel, the PDSA cycle: plan, evaluate your process, blah blah blah, develop your improvement plan, implement the plan on a trial basis, collect your data and evaluate that against your original objectives, whatever those objectives were, and then act. So communicate your results, implement your new process, if not, start again, plan, etc. So it's a never-ending circle of continuous improvement. Just before I go on to, I'm just going to briefly name those 7 tools and then talk about ServQual briefly. We've got any questions just before I move on to those? No, that's all good. Alright, so here's your 7 problem solving tools. You've got cause and effect diagrams, flow charts, checklist control charts, scatter diagrams, Pareto analysis and histograms. Now these are all in let me see. The actual slide set in Moodle is called Managing Quality and Service Design. So you've got that on Moodle. So then finally, and this is because in terms of total quality management, a ServQual model has long been upheld as the best one that sits within hospitality as a service industry. So I'll show you that. And again, you need to go back and have a look at your notes. But basically, we're looking at gaps in service. So if you'll see on the diagram, you've got all these different things. So stuff from the consumer's angle, stuff from the provider's angle in terms of service delivery, service quality, from the customer's angle, personal needs, expected service and perceived service. And then you've got all those different gaps. So it's the gaps that you focus on. It's a bit like asset control. You identify where your gaps might be and then you try and address them. So in the ServQual model, and again, do some more reading about it so that you can discuss it in more depth. But you've got 5 gaps. So gap 1 comes from not knowing what your customers expect. Gap 2 is delivering the wrong service quality. Gap 3 is the service performance gap. So what that is where this is what you say you should be delivering, but you actually deliver something of a lesser standard. Gap 4, when your promises don't match actual delivery. So that's the same thing. It could be the same as gap 3, but the difference is that you've actually made that service promise via external communication to your customers. So you've said, we'll do this for you. Then when they come in and have that service, they don't actually get it. And then gap 5, this is the hardest one to control. And again, you can work that out through your reading. The hardest one to control because it's the perceived service that they get and their expected service. So they'll have an idea of what they're going to get via word of mouth communications from their friends, etc., or maybe past experience where they've been before. So they'll have an expectation of the level of service that you're going to give to them. But if they perceive that that level doesn't reach that, that's where your gap is. So that's where your service quality gap is. So those are the things that you're going to talk about. Now, what I would say is, go back through your notes. There's a lot more depth to them. and do some wider reading. It's not just about what I tell you in lectures, it's also about the wider reading that you do around these subject areas. So have we got any questions? No questions? Because we're pretty much done now. No questions. Okay. Either you've stopped listening or I've made perfect sense. We'll see when the exams come in which one it is. Right, just before I go, I'm going to stay on and just take questions if anybody has them. But I'm going to email you both of these sets of lecture notes and also the YouTube link for the recordings of both sessions. Now that'll take me a couple of hours to get those up online, but once I've got them up there, they'll be available and you can go back and have a look. But just in terms of who's here, I'm going to read out your names, and then if your name isn't in there, can you type it in the box please and say I haven't said your name. So I've got Angelos, I've got Autumn, I've got Billy, Clara, Emily, Hannah B, Jasmine, Lily Feng, Liv, Luke, Hannah T, Mostyn, Sarah, Shane, Sophie, Susmita, Sylvia, Tiffany, Christina and Samantha. Is there anyone else? Yes, I got you, Lily. Anybody there whose name I haven't read out? Right, so I'm assuming I've got everybody's name. 2, 4, 6, 8, 14, 16, 18, 20. Right, okay. Emily, your question. It's entirely up to you. I would probably suggest your summary can be quite brief here, and you can do that relation to competitive business throughout. So, you know, applying that contextually to each little section, because most of it's quite straightforward anyway. Alright, so I'm going to stop the recording now.